Okay, today I'm at Towcester with Steve Nash, who is a greyhound photographer. Now, Steve, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. Can you tell us, to begin with, what is your history in greyhound racing?
Well, it goes back quite a long way, because I remember going with my dad to Crayford. That's the original Crayford track. There's now Sainsbury's there now, because that was all knocked down and rebuilt. But that goes back to when I was a kid, but I always had a great interest in the sport from a very early age. And when I was old enough to go regularly, I spent a lot of time at Crayford because that was my local track back then. Kept that involvement going, and then got into ownership in the 80s with two other guys who I worked with in London, and we bought a couple of dogs at Wembley. Had some good success with those, bought them at Hackney Auctions actually, and had some good success with that. And because I was a photographer of sorts at the time, I had a very keen interest in it as an amateur, so I taught myself, all totally self-taught. And then when we got these two dogs at Wembley, I was the self-appointed photographer for the syndicate, I suppose, and we went along to Wembley, and I chronicled their careers all the way through. That got me interested in taking pictures of other people's dogs at Wembley and the open races and the other dogs that came to visit the track. Got involved in going to other tracks at the time, and then quite a lucky thing happened at that time with regards to sport, because we had Ballyregan Bob and Skurlow Champ around at that time. I'm talking about 85, now 86, and they were fantastic dogs to follow, both completely different. Skurlow Champ, still talked about today, is his quirky style of running, coming from miles behind. And at the other end we had Ballyregan Bob, who was peerless over 6 bends, and I made up my mind to start following those two dogs as well. And that culminated in their famous showdown at Wembley between the two of them. That unfortunately went a bit wrong from Skurlow Champ's point of view, but that was really, I then carried on following Ballyregan Bob through his attempts at the UK racing record, and then of course which then went to the world record, which he then completed at Hove. And then it's basically since then been at it ever since, just photographing all the top dogs. There was an important point to put in around about that time as well. April 86 the Racing Post started. Up until then I've been working for the Sporting Life and the Greyhound Star. The Greyhound Star is an association I'm still proud to have today, and the Racing Post started in April 86, and I've been with them ever since that very first day. I'm quite proud of that record with them. That's 32 years now we've been going strong, covering all the top events as much as one guy can do, all over the country, from Poole up to Peelaw Grange, a Scottish Derby, Irish Derby, you name it, I've been there. I've been to every track in the country, plus of course, I mean, I've loved the nights in Ireland as well, and got to know everybody in the sport, and it's been a wonderful journey, still going on today. And now here we are at Towcester for the second Greyhound Derby at this venue.
Okay, you've obviously been very successful at photographing greyhounds. Is there a special art to it as opposed to horse racing or any other sport?
It's all about movement. It's all about capturing the moment. I think you'll find that horse racing, often in weather like this, of course, that we've got today, makes that a bit easier. Dogs generally a lot smaller, pretty quick, and a lot of it takes place at night as well. So you have to basically go back to learn the art of the actual photography itself is quite specialised, because you're working in difficult environments of track lighting when it's dark, and you have to learn what is called available light photography, especially in action. If I could just quickly show you an inspiration to me back in the 80s was Chris Smith. I don't know if you can see that on the video, but this is his book Sporting Focus. Now, I bought this in 1987 because I wanted to take pictures like that. People there might also recognise that as Hackney, not to be confused with the Blur front cover, by the way. That was a bit later and taken by Rob Thomas. But anyway, back to the business of the actual differences between horse racing and dog racing. Well, some of the horse racing photographers actually try dog racing and then say it can be quite tricky, because autofocus doesn't really work on dog racing. The dogs are just simply too quick. The lighting is often quite poor, and the cameras have to be absolutely top-notch. Timing and knowledge of the camera is also very, very important. You're using camera gear. Cameras these days, so many people have got cameras now, and they're what we call point and shoot cameras, and they're great now. The camera's what you can pack into a very small piece of equipment these days is amazing. but there's still a need when it comes to action. When things start moving, it starts getting interesting, and you're trying to capture that moment on a still, not a video, a still, and it does take proper gear to be able to do that, and you have to know your way around that gear as well. And that's the thing you have to learn. It takes experience, it takes a lot of patience, and just keep working at it, and you know, eventually you get the hang of the different skill that's involved in.
So who would you say the most photogenic people and or dogs you have photographed in your career have been?
Oh, that would be tricky. People, that'd be a bit of a tricky question to answer, really, wouldn't it? I could upset a few people there. Photogenic dogs, I can certainly done some lovely. Brindle is a lovely colour in dogs, in my opinion, and you get some lovely head shots, portrait shots. I mean, Jimmy Lolly was a particular one that I can recall. I dare say people watching this will immediately be shouting at me for not remembering their dog, but there's been a lot of very photogenic dogs in the past. Some of them particularly good in action as well. There are some dogs that I've managed to capture in action. People ask me to get a picture of their dog, and I've got 2 or 3 nice shots of their dog, and someone else will want their dog, and they just by luck. You do need a bit of luck in this job, like everybody, you all need a bit of luck, and it just hasn't worked out for that particular dog. But I just, yeah, photogenic wise, these sort of days, obviously tracks differ as well in their backdrops, and we are here today at one of those ones that obviously is pretty much top of the list since they started this track here.
Have you got any favourite photographs that you can share with us, please?
Well, a couple spring to mind. Back in the old days, I was asked this question obviously before today a few times. So back in the old days, Ballyrick and Bob, as I mentioned earlier, was always the one that I wanted to get, and I got a really, really good shot. Back in the days of film, this is black and white film we're talking about, all processed at home in my own darkroom. Ballyrick and Bob was on his way. I think it was the night he equalled the record at Haringey. And you don't know back then. These days, it's digital, you know exactly what you've got straight away. In those days, you used to get the train back from Haringey, process the film at home. So it means a lot when the pictures come out and you print it yourself, process the film, print it. And that was my favourite shot for many years because it made the Evening Standard pages, full page. I think it was half a page in the Standard, full page in a couple of other papers, and we got national coverage, which at the time was going somewhere. George Curtis had a lot to do with that. He's very famous trainer as well. But more recently, one that came along and gave me a great satisfaction is the Triple Dead Heat. I'd always wanted to be around when there was a Triple Dead Heat, particularly if it was in a big race. And the marathon at Romford, I think it was 2011, going back a few years now, but at the time it gave me a great buzz because the 3 dogs went over the line together at Romford at the end of their 925, and it looked very close to me on camera. And then there was the long call for the print or whatever, and then Peter O'Dowd finally read out that it was actually a Triple Dead Heat, and I knew that I had that picture in the camera. That was a great feeling, and that went pretty big in all the Nationals as well. I mean, anything that I can get in the Nationals gives me a fantastic buzz because the sport as a whole just doesn't get that coverage.
So is there any young photographer that's watching this now, any advice that you would give them specifically for somebody that wants to get into photography with greyhounds?
Photography of greyhounds, well, it is quite specialised. The one word I would use is patience. People often do come along and think, oh, I fancy a bit of that, and they find out very quickly that either their gear isn't up to scratch. You do need some serious stuff. You don't have to have the top stuff, but you need proper pro equipment and proper lenses to be able to, if you really wanting to try and stop greyhounds in flight. They are moving pretty quickly. So you're talking about shutter speeds of anything from 1,000 of a second up to 2,000 a second. I use remote cameras and things like that to try and capture this action. It's not easy, but if you start off and take your time with it and just practice and persevere. I didn't walk into the sport, I didn't walk into the photography and immediately start. My first shots of my dogs were pretty rubbish, but you work at it. You buy lots of magazines. I used to spend a fortune on photographic magazines, brushing up on the techniques, trying to learn things, and gradually build it up. Be patient, gradually build it up. Visit the tracks and work from a public area where perhaps ask permission first would be a good idea because they still do get people with flash guns going off. No flash, Take your time, patience, don't expect brilliant results straight away, and work from a public area, try and get some shots, build up a little portfolio, and then gradually you will get to know from mistakes, and you'll get the timing of the dogs right. There's also a technique I should very quickly mention without going technical, but panning is a very well-known photographic technique where I'll just sort of show it with my fingers, is you actually go with the speed of, you don't just sit there with the camera like that taking a picture. As the dog goes past, you actually go with the movement of the dog and take the picture as the dog goes through the frame. That's called panning, and that is a technique. Practice it, it comes good.
Okay, without being negative, obviously over the past 30 odd years or more that you've been doing this as a job, you've seen quite a few changes in greyhound racing. Everybody would agree not many of them for the better. And what would you like to see happen in greyhound racing for the future good of the sport?
That's a difficult one as well, Simon, because I've seen many tracks sadly close as well, and that's one of the those are the real dark days. Last year we had 3 tracks close, and that was and down the years, Haringey I mentioned earlier for Ballyrig and Bob sadly went. I used to go to White City, that closed. Wembley, my favourite track where my own dogs used to run, it was a great shame when that closed as greyhound racing. It's not looking, it's gradual decline. I don't think there's anything we can dispute about that. I don't think the game's gone completely like some people, the doom merchants, are always going on about. And certainly places like this has been a breath of fresh air to the sport, what Toast has done. I remember coming here for the press day and looking out there, and there were just some flags there. It was a horse racing meeting, and they invited all the press here. And it was just plans and drawings then. You could see the potential of what they had here. And this has bucked the trend, obviously. As far as what can happen in the future for the sport, that's a difficult one really for me to answer. I don't have any power over it myself, apart from just keep doing what I do and keep the publicity going as best as I can. As far as what the sport could do, I think there could be more done to promote the sport, if I'm totally honest. I think that the latest business going on with Sky seems to be going backwards instead of forwards. We need to, I think, try and get something together where we really do try and publicise the sport, take on the antis, and actually show just what a fantastic sport it is. That's how I got into it. I've loved it. I've loved it for, over 50 years now. So, and getting people involved in the sport through syndicates or through promotion packages, publicising it, get some national coverage. I've said this before, if we can break down the barriers with editors at national newspapers, then you have half a chance. And I know it's a difficult ask, but it needs big PR, and we might just be able to take the sport forward again, or at least stop it from the spiral that some people seem to think it is in.
We've talked very passionately about greyhound racing. You obviously love it dearly. Can you give us a couple of your most favourite memories from your career of greyhound racing?
I sort of covered that a little bit, because my own favourite moments are when you get special pictures. Obviously, that's my affiliation with the sport. Really, what it's all about is what I do. And as far as favourite moments, of course, the other big favourite for me was that night at the awards 2 years ago when I received the Greyhound Services Award, voted by my peers at the Greyhound Right Association. That was a fantastic night, and quite unusual to vote amongst ourselves for one of us, I know. So that meant a lot to me, and I was very, very pleased to receive that night. I think actually last year was pretty good here, when Jeff Hill lifted that trophy, because this derby is the pinnacle of everyone. That's what they want to win with their dog. And last year, seeing Seamus and Teresa Cahill win the derby, and the atmosphere here was fantastic. And we've moved on from Wimbledon. There were some great days at Wimbledon. I remember Hit the Lid was a great favourite of mine when he won the derby, and that was a real really good performance. Several down the years. Westmead Hawk, of course, was awesome at Wimbledon, and fully deserves his place in the Hall of Fame. He was a fantastic dog. Difficult dog to photograph, actually, because he'd often come from so far off the pace. You'd have to keep one eye on him while the race was going on, otherwise he would catch you out. But a fantastic dog to watch, fantastic track craft. Probably when Westmead Hawk won his second derby was a favourite moment for me as well. Most of my memories do admittedly go around the Derby because it is the highest event in the sports, and it's what everybody wants to go to. Even in these heats of the Derby, people winning a heat, it means so much to them. But those seeing people win stuff, I get a real kick out of that. Whether it be a dog that hasn't won for ages and wins a graded race somewhere and it means a lot to them, or a dog that's come back from injury, or winning the pinnacle of the sport. They're all favourite moments to me, because it's corny, but I do love the sport so much, and it's why I've probably kept at it all this time and not been tempted to go into horse racing or any other forms of. People often ask me if I do other stuff. I'm just too busy with this, and I love doing this anyway. I could take photos of greyhounds all day. It just gets into you. Probably got my dad to thank for that from when I was 7 at Crayford, but that's the way it is, and that's what I do.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve.